All right, guys, so we got to talk about the most disgusting and desperate political campaign ad I've ever seen in my life. Okay, this guy should be disqualified from the race simply for posting this campaign ad. I don't know who in his PR team told him that this was a good idea, but this is one of the stupidest, vile, and despicable campaign ads I've ever seen in my life. Okay, and this campaign ad comes from a Democrat by the name of Charles Booker, who happens to be black. Okay, and he's running against Rand Paul, who is the current senator in Kentucky. Okay, so without further ado, let's go ahead and play the clip of this campaign ad in which he is wearing a noose during the ad. Take a look.
The pain of our past persists to this day. In Kentucky, like many states throughout the South, lynching was a tool of terror. It was used to kill hopes for freedom. It was used to kill my ancestors. Now, in a historic victory for our Commonwealth, I have become the first black Kentuckian to receive the Democratic nomination for U.S. Senate. My opponent, the very person who compared expanded health care to slavery. The person who said he would have opposed the Civil Rights Act. The person who single-handedly blocked an anti-lynching act from being federal law. The choice couldn't be clearer. Do we move forward together, or do we let politicians like Rand Paul forever hold us back and drive us apart? In November, we will choose healing. We will choose Kentucky.
Yeah, Democrats are freaking desperate, man. That guy is desperate as hell. Okay? And this type of ads that Democrats come out with when they're desperate, right? There was another guy, a black guy, I believe from Louisiana or Mississippi, okay, who did an ad in which he was smoking weed, right? Just straight up smoking a blunt in the ad, right? Again, this is the type of stuff that you do when you don't want to talk about inflation. You don't want to talk about the border crisis. You don't want to talk about the crime crisis. You don't want to talk about gas prices. You don't want to talk about our failures abroad from a foreign policy perspective. You don't want to talk about the failures of the Biden administration. So what you do is that you get on camera and put a noose around your neck because this guy thinks he's Juicy Smollett or Bubba Wallace or something. But in reality, he's really just a clown. He's a race-baiting clown because that's what he looks like wearing that noose around his neck. He looks like a clown. He's an idiot. You ain't never been lynched a day in your life. You ain't never come close to being lynched a day in your life, right? But hey, you got to play on people's emotions. You got to play on their heartstrings. You got to play the race card here and to try to pretend like your opponent is some type of racist, okay? You take cheap shots because you have nothing. You have nothing. And I mean, the dude, damn near, I mean, he basically lied throughout the whole campaign ad about Rand Paul and his positions. Okay? Let's start with, Rand Paul said he would oppose the Civil Rights Act. He did not say that. People got to understand, Rand Paul is a libertarian, right? And libertarians have positions that are very principled, okay? They're controversial, which, conservatives and, liberals and progressives really don't like that much, but they're principled. And I want you guys to actually listen to what Rand Paul said about the Civil Rights Act so you guys can understand his position on that legislation. Take a look.
Would you have voted for the Civil Rights Act of 1964?
I like the Civil Rights Act in the sense that it ended discrimination in all public domains, and I'm all in favor of that.
But?
You had to ask me the but. I don't like the idea of telling private business owners. I abhor racism. I think it's a bad business decision to ever exclude anybody from your restaurant. But at the same time, I do believe in private ownership. But I think there should be absolutely no discrimination in anything that gets any public funding. And that's most of what the Civil Rights Act was about, to my mind.
And then it was extended by most localities to include all. Would you have favored those local decisions?
Well, on a local basis, it might be a little different. And the thing is I would speak out in favor of it. I mean, I look at like the speeches of Martin Luther King, and I tell you, I become emotional watching the speeches of Martin Luther King. I loved it because he was a great transformative figure, but he was a believer. What I don't like most about politics is almost none of them are believers, and he was a true believer. And he fought government injustice, and those were governmental rules and laws that forbid people, from riding the bus or sitting in certain parts of the bus or drinking water from public fountains. All of that should have ended, and I think was a great occurrence that it did.
But under your philosophy, it would be okay for Dr. King not to be served at the counter at Woolworths.
I would not go to that Woolworths, and I would stand up in my community and say it's abhorrent. But the hard part, and this is the hard part about believing in freedom, is if you believe in the First Amendment, for example, you have to, for example, most good defenders of the First Amendment will believe in abhorrent groups standing up and saying awful things. And we're here at the bastion of newspaperdom. I'm sure you believe in the First Amendment, so you understand that people can say bad things. It's the same way with other behaviors. In a free society, we will tolerate boorish people who have abhorrent behavior, but if we're civilized people, we publicly criticize that and don't belong to those groups or don't associate with those people.
But it's different with race because certainly for 100 years, discrimination based on race was codified under federal law.
Exactly, it's institutionalized.
That's right.
And that's why we had to end all of the institutional racism. And I would in favor completely of that.
Yeah, so what you guys just heard there from Rand Paul, that the left says, oh, he would have opposed the Civil Rights Act. Well, they're actually getting that twisted. I think his father, Ron Paul, actually said in an interview with Chris Matthews that he would oppose it. But the reason why Rand Paul said what he said about the Civil Rights Act of 1964 is that he is taking a true libertarian position, right? People got to understand he's a libertarian. And one thing I respect about libertarians is that, again, their positions are controversial, right? To both sides of the aisle, to conservatives and to liberals. But they're actually very principled in the things they believe. And the position that he's taking on the Civil Rights Act is actually a true libertarian position in the sense that he's saying, look, I want to get rid of all the institutional racism, right? So any type of discrimination that is sponsored by the government, okay, I want to get rid of that. Okay, I think that is wrong. I don't think that the government should be discriminating based off race. However, when it comes to private businesses, and this is where it gets controversial for some people, right? But again, you got to understand, this is a true libertarian position. He's like, look, I don't believe in telling private businesses who they can and who they can't discriminate against. Right? That's just what it is. Okay? And this is why, during the pandemic, conservatives and libertarians butted head on the whole masking issue, right? And the vaccine mandates. Because, again, the libertarian position, the true libertarian position is that, well, these companies should be allowed to discriminate against whoever they want to discriminate against, right? That is actually really the true libertarian position because that is a part of freedom, right? And that is also why Rand Paul went on to say that, hey, in a true free society, when we're talking about the First Amendment and freedom of speech, we have to tolerate people who are racist, right? People who are going to say racist things, and we can't necessarily be jailing people for saying that stuff because at the end of the day, that is what freedom is about, okay? Freedom has positive and negative externalities. There are things that we're going to have to deal with when it comes to a free society. This is the same argument that applies when it comes to guns. In a free society where people have the right to keep and bear arms, you're going to have people that use those arms for bad things, right? You're going to have people that use guns to commit murders and mass shootings. However, that is what you have to deal with when you have a free society, right? That is going to happen. Now, does that mean that, we should necessarily not punish those people for that? No, obviously you punish people for committing those terrible acts of violence, but you got to understand that that is what's going to happen, right? Because that is human nature. You have bad people that are going to use guns. However, that's not an excuse to take away the rights of self-defense from everybody else and law-abiding citizens just because criminals are using the guns for bad things, right? What you focus on is locking up the criminals and having a deterrent from the criminals committing these types of deadly, tragic acts of violence, right? That is what you focus on. But you got to understand, again, in a free society, you're going to deal with some consequences of freedom, okay? That's just what happens. But I'm going to tell you, that is much more preferable to the alternative, in which you have a world in which, no, the government only has a monopoly on violence, okay, where they take away everybody's guns. And that means that if the government has any mandate, the citizens have to do it, because they can't defend themselves against the government. They can't fight back against the government, okay? Or a society or government where you can't speak freely, okay? Where the government tells you what you can and you can't say. So yeah, I would much rather deal with, yes, some occasional gun violence and mass shootings and racist people being able to say what they want to say, than, again, the alternative in which the government controls everything in regards to how you defend yourself and what speech is allowed. And people have to understand that. People have to understand libertarian positions are controversial. They really are. So yeah, when you hear Rand Paul say, look, you know, this small section of the Civil Rights Act in regards to keeping small businesses from racially discriminating against people, I really don't believe in that. I really don't support that, because, again, that's not really a position of freedom. That is controversial, but that is actually the libertarian position. And that is the position that he's taking. Now, he's not taking that position on the Civil Rights Act out of racism. The guy clearly admires Dr. Martin Luther King. He talked about Dr. Martin Luther King. He talked about how businesses that racially discriminate against people should not use those businesses, right? People shouldn't give their money to those businesses. He's basically advocating for a free market solution to businesses discriminate against people based off skin color and race, right? He's saying society as a whole should say, hey, you know what? We won't use these businesses. We won't shop at these businesses. We won't give these businesses our money if they discriminate against people based off race. Okay, again, that is a true libertarian position. Now, this guy also tried to attack Rand Paul on opposing the so-called anti-lynching bill, right? Which Rand Paul did a couple years ago, but now he's actually sponsoring the Emmett Till anti-lynching bill, right? So again, this guy failed to mention that in his ad, that, hey, you know, Rand Paul is actually sponsoring the bill now. Okay, which in my opinion, you know, hey, he can do that, but I don't think there's a need for a so-called anti-lynching bill. Nobody's getting lynched, right? Nobody's getting lynched. So again, I don't even agree with stuff like that, because it's not even like, it's not a problem, okay? I don't worry about getting up every single day and getting lynched. I'm much more concerned about potentially being killed by somebody that looks like me than I am about being lynched by some racist white supremacist. What he also fails to mention, why he's trying to paint Rand Paul some type of flaming racist, is that Rand Paul actually sponsored the Justice for Breonna Taylor Act, okay? A piece of legislation that would prohibit no-knock warrants, okay? Now, this bill is named and honors Breonna Taylor, right? Who the woke revolutionaries tore up cities, destroyed property over for 3 or 4, 5, 6 months straight, right? Again, this guy is sponsoring legislation that they agree with. But that doesn't matter, because remember, guys, during that time in which the woke revolutionaries were protesting, they actually were protesting against Rand Paul. Even though he had sponsored this legislation, they actually was heckling this man, I think outside of the RNC in Washington, D.C., right? Again, that was one of the more controversial moments during the George Floyd / race riots. So again, this is how these people think. This is how these people think. It doesn't matter what Rand Paul says. Well, he's a Republican, you know, and we don't like him because he's a Republican. Therefore, he must be racist. Okay, we're going to make campaign ads, you know, basically trying to make this man out to be some type of KKK-style Jim Crow racist. Okay, even though, again, the party that was responsible for a lot of that stuff are the Democrats. It's the same party that this guy belongs to, but they don't want to talk about that either. They just put stuff out here like this to play on people's heartstrings and emotions and ignorance, right? Because that's what it's about. The Democrat Party really thinks their voters are dumb. Their voters are dumb and emotional, right? That is what the Democrat Party thinks, and this is why they put out ads like this where they don't talk about any of their own policy positions or the failures of the Democrat Party from a policy perspective. They don't talk about that. They simply just try to paint their opponents as, well, they're racist. They're racist. And again, this guy is so desperate because he knows he's not going to win. The only thing I know about this guy is the fact that he's a black Democrat running against Rand Paul. That's it, because that's all he talks about. I'm a black Democrat running against Rand Paul. Vote for me. That guy's racist. That's his whole campaign platform. And that's exactly why he's not going to win. That's exactly why he's going to get blown out. Because he doesn't stand for anything at all. He doesn't stand for anything. But again, this is par for the course when it comes to the Democrat Party. Not surprised. There's not a floor that Democrats won't stoop to in order to gain political clout, right? That's just how it goes. So let me know what you guys think. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. Most importantly, share a Black conservative perspective. Peace.